Hi, I'm Mike Muldoon from Alstom. You may or may not have heard of Alstom, but Alstom is a sustainable mobility provider. How about that? That means, actually, that's the catchy name for what we can call a company that specialises mainly in trains and rail systems, because, let's face it, they are already a very sustainable way of transporting people. But we have to move on and we have to improve how we do that. Buses are much more efficient if they're full than cars in terms of emissions. The same applies to trains, but both of them are driven by diesel. So we need to look at alternatives on how we can improve them. And the rail industry has alternatives like electrification. It has alternatives. It may be able to consider batteries, but it does also need to find ways of longer range self-powered vehicles. And that's really what Richard just so helpfully described for me. The other commonality with what he was describing is, of course, that trains come in fleets, and that's quite a useful thing as well. So Alstom currently has built and operates the only passenger-carrying fuel cell-powered trains in the world. There are 2 trains running in Germany and have been running now for about 13, 14 months, just in regular service, integrated with a diesel fleet. And that diesel fleet will be replaced in due course, in about 2 years' time, by a completely hydrogen-powered fleet of trains. The only reason it's not happening today or tomorrow is that there's the process of actually implementing the fuel provision, which is a recurring theme that we've heard today about linking things. But again, you deploy the fleet of trains, you also deploy the fueling station for them, and the investors in the trains and the investors in the fuel systems both have returns viable. The picture there shows you what a British hydrogen train could look like. This is a project we've developed with a company called Eversholt. It's a conversion of an existing train. And I know certainly that often goes down like a lead balloon amongst passengers or politicians in particular, who perceive there always to be a need for a new train. But new trains have a 35-year life. If anyone today wants to invest in a new train, they want to know they've got a 35-year guaranteed usage for that train, and that means all sorts of complicated undertakings on behalf of many people to make it happen. So a nice pragmatic and sensible response is actually to look at converting what we have, which are perfectly usable trains, and redeploying them in a sustainable manner. And just like when you redecorate at home, you don't necessarily bulldoze the entire house and build it again. You take the superstructure, you take the basics, and you re-engineer them. And that's what we would do with this train. Why would anyone want to do that? What's the point? Well, we've talked a lot about decarbonisation, and this is me. They're always complicated messages to try and get over some of this stuff. You're a very educated audience, but often they're not. So we tried to come up with statements we could paint on the side of a bus. I'm not sure if this actually works. It needs to be a hydrogen bus, of course, but there are roughly 2,500 rail carriages currently powered by diesel. And I'm talking about passenger carriages, the ones you love, pacers, small diesel trains, the sort of thing that this part of the world particularly has an affinity for, but would quite like to see the back of. Not getting rid of them gets rid of their carbon footprint, it gets rid of their unpleasantness generally, but it also gets rid of the particulate and clean air issues that go with trains in stations and other factors. So there's many points to doing it. Let's say half of those trains, those carriages, could be replaced by hydrogen trains. What's the benefit? Well, we'd create fleets, multiple fleets. We're talking deployments, not demonstrations, as someone said earlier today. Crucial, because business cases on demonstrations don't really make any sense. You've still got to develop the same product, so let's do fleets. You'd be consuming around 150 tonnes of hydrogen a day. That's a useful demand. Roughly speaking, a fleet of 10 trains wants 3 or 4 tonnes of hydrogen a day. That's manna from heaven to anyone who's spent their time trying to work out a business case to provide fuel for cars, because it's a sustainable timetable delivery. You'd save about, what's that, 533,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide a year, or CO2e. That's laudable and beneficial. Of course, we know there's huge numbers involved in all aspects of the energy sector, and carbon emissions are one of those aspects, but it's a worthwhile amount. It takes about 383,000 cars off the road, arguably. So if you took that many cars off the road, you'd save the same in carbon dioxide. And we collectively, as taxpayers, have decided that changing cars for electric cars is beneficial. And in fact, if any of you choose to do it, you can have £3,500 from the government for the bother, plus all the charging investments and everything else. That's the equivalent of 1.35 billion of subsidy that get taken off the road every year. So it's quite an interesting consideration. And then if you extrapolate the clean air and health benefits of removing those cars, you could argue you also save 100 million in health costs a year. Small, but worthwhile. And 110 premature deaths, which, again, a small number, but pretty damn important if you're one of them. So from that point of view, there are many benefits to doing trains. We are a small part of that transport emission load that you saw earlier on the graph, if you were here in the plenary at the start of the day. But all of us have got to do our bit, and it is an easy win that's ready to go if we can just get the pump priming that's, again, was described in relation to wind power earlier. But certain steps need to be taken, certain stakeholders engaged, and we're ready to deploy these trains in the UK. Thank you.